"We need new energy at the top." The words fell across the conference room like a death sentence, cold and final. I am Marcus Dean, 57 years old, and until this morning, I was the Senior Operations Director of Lennox Systems, the largest data technology company in Denver. 18 years of dedication, 18 years of building something from nothing, and now they were replacing me with someone who had zero experience but had one very convenient qualification. He was married to the CEO's daughter. I sat there in that sterile conference room, the mahogany table reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead, watching faces I had worked alongside for nearly 2 decades avoid my gaze. The board members shuffled their papers nervously, their expensive suits and practiced corporate speak doing little to mask what this really was, a betrayal wrapped in business jargon. "Marcus," said Robert Lennox, the CEO and founder, his voice carrying that familiar tone of forced authority I had heard him use countless times with difficult clients. "You've been invaluable to this company's growth, but we're at a crossroads now, and we need leadership that can take us into the next phase of our evolution." I almost laughed. Evolution, as if replacing experience with nepotism was some kind of natural selection. But I kept my face neutral, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I had seen this coming for months, maybe even years. The writing had been on the wall ever since Emily Lennox married Jared Halden, and her father started bringing him to company events, introducing him as someone with fresh perspectives on digital transformation. Fresh perspectives. That was corporate speak for he's family now, and family gets what family wants. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was Marcus Dean, the man who had started at Lennox Systems when it was nothing more than Robert's ambitious dream and a handful of servers in a converted warehouse. I was there when we had 12 employees and were one missed payroll away from bankruptcy. I was the one who stayed up 72 straight hours during the 2008 financial crisis, restructuring our entire operational framework to keep us afloat while other tech companies were folding left and right. I was there during the pandemic in 2020 when every business publication was predicting the end of mid-tier tech companies like ours. While other firms were laying off employees by the hundreds, I developed the remote operational protocols that not only kept us running but actually increased our efficiency by 37%. We didn't fire a single person. Not one. I was the architect behind our breakthrough data analytics system that landed us the first major government contract with the Department of Transportation. That system, which I designed and implemented, became the foundation for everything Lennox Systems achieved afterward. The contracts with Homeland Security, the EPA Data Management Project, the Social Security Administration Modernization Initiative, all of it built on the framework I created. But none of that mattered now, because Jared Halden had married the right woman. "We've decided to offer you an early retirement package," continued Margaret Chen, the board chairwoman, sliding a thick envelope across the table toward me. "It's quite generous, considering your years of service." Considering my years of service, as if my contribution to this company was some kind of charity case they were graciously acknowledging. Jared Halden sat at the far end of the table, trying to look solemn and professional, but I could see the barely contained excitement in his eyes. At 34, he was about to become the senior operations director of a company worth $200 million, and he had done absolutely nothing to earn it except marry well. His background was in entertainment media. He had spent the last 8 years managing social media campaigns for B-list celebrities and small-time influencers in Los Angeles. His most significant achievement, according to his LinkedIn profile, was increasing Instagram engagement for a reality TV star by 23% over 6 months. That was his qualification for running the operational backbone of a federal contractor that processed sensitive data for multiple government agencies. The man had never managed a technical team, never dealt with compliance audits, never had to explain to federal oversight committees why a system upgrade was 3 days behind schedule or why server maintenance would temporarily affect data processing speeds. He had never been woken up at 3 a.m. because a critical system was throwing error codes and millions of dollars in contracts hung in the balance. But he was Emily's husband, and that made him untouchable. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, my voice steady and professional. I had learned long ago that emotional reactions were weakness in rooms like this. When would you like me to transition my responsibilities? Robert looked relieved. He had probably expected anger, arguments, maybe even threats of legal action. The fact that I was accepting this quietly made everyone in the room more comfortable, and comfortable people made mistakes. We'd like you to spend the next 2 weeks bringing Jared up to speed on your current projects, Robert said. He's eager to learn from your expertise. Eager to learn. Another corporate euphemism. What he meant was that Jared needed me to hand over 18 years of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and operational secrets so he could pretend he had earned his position. Of course, I replied. I'll make sure the transition is as smooth as possible. What I didn't tell them was that in my jacket pocket, I carried a business card that might change everything. Leona Patel, Chief Technology Officer of Solentra Analytics, had given it to me 2 years ago during a joint project we had worked on for the Department of Health and Human Services. We had spent 3 weeks collaborating on a data analysis system for tracking pharmaceutical supply chains, and she had been impressed with my work. When you're ready to leave Linux, she had said over coffee during our final project meeting, give me a call. Solentra is expanding, and we need people who understand both the technical side and the client relationship side of this business. I had smiled politely and pocketed the card, never imagining I would actually use it. Linux Systems was my life, my creation, my identity. Why would I ever leave? Now I knew why. The meeting ended with handshakes and fake smiles, the kind of performative courtesy that corporate culture demanded even in moments of complete betrayal. I gathered my things and walked back to my office, the same office I had occupied for 12 years, the same office where I had made the phone calls that saved this company more times than anyone in that conference room would ever know. My assistant, Jennifer, looked up as I entered. She had been with the company for 8 years, and I could see in her eyes that she already knew. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, especially bad news. Mr. Dean, she said quietly, I'm so sorry. Nothing to be sorry about. Jennifer, I replied, settling into my chair for what would be one of the last times. Change is part of business. But as I sat there looking out my window at the Denver skyline, the mountains visible in the distance on this clear October afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't tied to this place, to these people, to their decisions and their politics and their nepotism. I pulled out my phone and looked at Leona Patel's business card. Her direct line was handwritten on the back in blue ink. I had memorized those numbers months ago, not knowing why. Now I knew why. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in professional patience. Every morning, Jared Halden would arrive at my office with his notebook and his eager questions, ready to absorb decades of experience in bite-sized daily lessons. He took notes frantically, as if writing everything down would somehow transfer the intuition and judgment that only came with experience. So when the compliance audit happens, he said during our session on Tuesday morning, what exactly are they looking for? I explained the audit process, the documentation requirements, the specific federal regulations that governed our data handling procedures. I walked him through the client relationship protocols, the escalation procedures for technical failures, the delicate balance between transparency and confidentiality that kept our government contracts secure. This seems pretty straightforward, he said, clicking his pen. I mean, as long as the systems do what they're supposed to do and we meet the deadlines, the clients stay happy, right? I looked at him across my desk. This young man who thought 18 years of institutional knowledge could be distilled into simple formulas. It's a bit more complex than that. Jared, relationships in this business are built on trust, and trust takes time to develop. These clients have worked with me personally for years. They call my direct line when they have concerns. They know I'll be straight with them about timelines and capabilities. Right, but I can do that too, he said with the confidence of someone who had never had to explain to a federal program manager why their data migration was delayed. I'm good with people. That's actually my specialty. I nodded politely. I'm sure you'll do fine. But I wasn't sure at all. On Wednesday, I watched him stumble through a routine client call with the Department of Transportation, promising delivery timelines that were impossible to meet and making commitments about system capabilities that didn't exist. When the client started asking technical questions about data encryption protocols, Jared looked at me with panic in his eyes. I took over the call, smoothing over his mistakes with the kind of diplomatic explanation that comes only from years of practice. After we hung up, I spent an hour explaining why we couldn't promise things we couldn't deliver, and why technical accuracy mattered more than optimistic projections. The clients need to trust that we know our limitations, I told him. The moment they think we're overpromising, we lose credibility that takes years to rebuild. Got it, he said, scribbling in his notebook. Be realistic about timelines. But I could see he didn't really get it. To him, this was all about managing expectations and keeping people happy. He didn't understand that in our business, a single mistake could cost millions of dollars and years of relationship building. He didn't grasp that our clients weren't just customers. They were partners in projects that affected national infrastructure and public safety. By Thursday of the second week, I had finished documenting all of my active projects, transferred my client contacts, and written detailed procedural guides for every operational process I had developed over the years. I had essentially handed over the blueprint for running the most successful division in the company. My farewell party was held in the break room on Friday afternoon. It was a modest affair. Sheet cake from the grocery store, coffee in paper cups, and about 30 people who had worked with me over the years. Robert Lennox made a brief speech about my contributions to the company, using the same generic language that probably appeared in retirement announcements across corporate America. Marcus has been the backbone of our operations for nearly 2 decades, he said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. His dedication and expertise have been invaluable. And while we're sad to see him go, we're excited about the fresh energy and new perspectives that Jared will bring to the role. Fresh energy, new perspectives, the same corporate speak from the conference room, recycled for public consumption. Jared himself gave a short speech, thanking me for my patience during the transition and promising to uphold the high standards I had established. He talked about innovation and modernization, about bringing the company into the digital age, as if we hadn't been a technology company all along. I know I have big shoes to fill, he said, looking directly at me, but I'm confident that we can build on Marcus's foundation and take Lennox Systems to the next level. The next level. I wondered what that meant to someone whose previous experience involved managing Instagram accounts. People approached me afterward with handshakes and well wishes, many of them expressing genuine sadness about my departure. Jennifer, my assistant, actually teared up when she hugged me goodbye. It won't be the same without you, she said. You were the one person here who actually knew what they were doing. I thanked everyone, packed the last items from my office into a cardboard box, and walked out of Lennox Systems for what I thought might be the last time. My badge was deactivated at 6 p.m. 18 years of access, 18 years of being essential to the daily operations of this company, ended with the click of a turnstile. That evening, I sat in my study at home, looking at Leona Patel's business card for what felt like the 100th time. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and I could hear her humming softly, the way she did when she was content. She had been supportive throughout this entire ordeal, never once suggesting that I fight the decision or make a scene. Maybe it's time for something new, she had said when I first told her about the early retirement offer. You've given that company everything. Maybe now it's time to give something to yourself. I picked up my phone and dialed Leona's number. It rang twice before she answered. Leona Patel. Leona, this is Marcus Dean from Lennox Systems. We worked together on the HHS pharmaceutical project a couple of years ago. Marcus. Her voice brightened immediately. I was hoping I'd hear from you. How are things at Lennox? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'm no longer with Lennox as of today. I was wondering if that offer you mentioned was still on the table. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her smile through the phone. Are you free tomorrow evening? I'd like to take you to dinner and discuss some opportunities. We arranged to meet at Taj Palace, a quiet Indian restaurant in downtown Denver that Leona had suggested. It's not fancy, she said, But the food is excellent, and we can talk without being overheard. I spent Saturday morning researching Solentra analytics more thoroughly than I had ever done before. What I found impressed me. Founded 8 years ago by a team of former NASA engineers, Solentra specialized in large-scale data processing for government and commercial clients. They had contracts with the Department of Defense, the National Weather Service, and several Fortune 500 companies that needed complex analysis of massive data sets. Unlike Linux systems, which had grown organically and somewhat haphazardly over the years, Solentra seemed to have been built with intention and precision. Their client list was smaller, but more prestigious. Their projects were more technically challenging, and their reputation in the industry was spotless. Most importantly, they were expanding. According to their recent press releases, Solentra had secured funding for a major initiative to build a dedicated government data analysis division. They were looking to hire experienced professionals who could navigate the complex world of federal contracting while delivering cutting-edge technical solutions. It sounded like exactly what I had been doing at Linux Systems, but with better resources and more sophisticated challenges. I arrived at Taj Palace 15 minutes early, partly out of nervousness and partly out of habit. Punctuality had been drummed into me during my early years in government contracting, when being late to a meeting could cost you a multi-million-dollar contract. Leona arrived exactly on time, and I recognized her immediately despite not having seen her in 2 years. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore a simple black blazer over dark jeans, the kind of understated professional attire that suggested confidence without ostentation. "Marcus," she said, extending her hand as she approached the table. "You look good. Retirement suits you." "It's been exactly 1 day," I replied, shaking her hand. "I'm not sure I've had time to develop the retirement glow yet." She laughed, settling into the seat across from me. "Tell me what happened. Last I heard, you were practically running the operational side of Linux systems." I gave her the abbreviated version, the board meeting, the early retirement offer, the transition to Jared Holden. I kept my tone professional and factual, avoiding any hint of bitterness or resentment. Complaining about former employers was unprofessional, and Leona was smart enough to read between the lines. "So they replaced you with the CEO's son-in-law," she said when I finished. "Someone with no technical background and no experience in government contracting." "That's correct." She shook her head. "Their loss, our gain. Let me tell you about what we're building at Solentra." Over the next 2 hours, between courses of excellent Indian food, Leona outlined Solentra's expansion plans. They were creating a new division focused specifically on government data analysis projects, the kind of high-stakes, high-visibility work that I had been doing at Linux for years. They needed someone with extensive experience in federal contracting, someone who understood both the technical requirements and the relationship management aspects of working with government clients. "We're not looking for just another project manager," she explained. "We need someone who can be the face of this division, someone the clients will trust and respect. Based on our work together on the HHS project, I know you're that kind of professional." The position she described was Chief Strategy Advisor for the Government Analytics Division, a role that would involve not just managing projects, but developing the strategic direction of the entire division. It came with a significant salary increase, equity participation in the company, and the resources to build something truly innovative. "There's one thing I need to be upfront about," Leona said as we finished our meal. "We're going to be competing directly with companies like Linux Systems for some of these contracts. We need someone who can bring not just expertise, but also relationships. I'm not asking you to do anything unethical, but your network of contacts in the federal contracting world would be valuable to us." I nodded slowly. This was the key question, the one that would determine whether this conversation led to anything substantial. Did I have enough influence with our former clients to potentially redirect their business towards Solentra? "I've worked with most of the major players in federal data management," I said carefully. "I have good relationships with decision makers at Transportation, Homeland Security, the EPA, and several other agencies. Whether those relationships would translate to new business for Solentra would depend on your ability to deliver superior solutions." "We can deliver," Leona said confidently. The question is whether you're interested in helping us prove it. I looked across the table at this woman who was offering me a chance to rebuild my career at a higher level than I had ever imagined possible. At Linux Systems, I had been the senior operations manager, respected but ultimately answerable to Robert Lennox and his board of directors. At Solentra, I would be a strategic advisor with equity participation, essentially a partner in building something new. I'm very interested, I said. We shook hands across the table, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. For the first time since that conference room meeting, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I might gain. The next week, I signed a contract with Solentra Analytics. The terms were better than anything Linux Systems had ever offered me, a base salary that was 40% higher than my previous position, performance bonuses tied to division revenue, and equity participation that could be worth millions if the company continued to grow. More importantly, I would have the authority to build the government analytics division according to my own vision, with resources and support that I had never had at Linux. Leona had made it clear that she trusted my judgment and wanted me to have the freedom to operate independently. I started work on a Monday morning in November, walking into Solentra's sleek downtown Denver offices with the same nervous energy I had felt on my first day at Linux Systems 18 years earlier. But this time, I wasn't a junior employee trying to prove myself. I was a senior executive with the experience and credibility to make an immediate impact. My first week was spent meeting with Solentra's existing team and getting oriented to their current projects and capabilities. What I found was impressive. A group of highly skilled engineers and analysts who were working on projects that were more technically sophisticated than anything I had seen at Linux Systems, where Linux had focused on steady, reliable data processing for routine government functions. Solentra was tackling complex analytical challenges that required innovative solutions. They were using machine learning algorithms to identify patterns in massive data sets, developing predictive models for everything from weather forecasting to economic analysis, and creating visualization tools that could present complex information in ways that non-technical decision makers could understand and use. It was exactly the kind of cutting-edge work that I had always wanted to do, but had never had the resources or support to pursue at Linux. By my second week, I was ready to start reaching out to my network of contacts in the federal government. I began with casual conversations, letting people know about my new position and Solentra's capabilities. I wasn't pushing for immediate business. I was simply reestablishing relationships and making sure people knew where to find me. The response was uniformly positive. Over the years, I had built a reputation for honest communication and reliable delivery, and that reputation followed me to Solentra. Several contacts mentioned ongoing frustrations with their current contractors and expressed interest in learning more about alternative solutions. One conversation in particular stood out. Janet Morrison, the Deputy Director of Data Systems at the Department of Transportation, had worked with me on multiple projects over the past 5 years. When I called to let her know about my new position, she immediately expressed interest in exploring new partnership opportunities. "Marcus, I have to be honest with you," she said. "We've been having some concerns about Linux Systems' ability to handle the expansion of the National Infrastructure Monitoring Project. The timelines they're proposing seem unrealistic, and some of the technical specifications they've submitted don't align with our requirements." This was interesting information. The National Infrastructure Monitoring Project was one of the largest contracts Linux Systems had ever secured, worth over $200 million over 5 years. It was also one of the projects I had originally designed and proposed, back when I was still with the company. "What specific concerns do you have?" I asked. Janet outlined several issues: missed deadlines on preliminary deliverables, technical proposals that seemed to misunderstand the project requirements, and communication problems with the new project leadership. It was clear that Jared Halden was struggling to manage the relationship and deliver on the commitments that had been made. "The contract has a performance review clause," Janet explained. "If we're not satisfied with their progress by the end of the first quarter, we have the option to terminate and rebid the project." I kept my response professional and neutral. Solentra would certainly be interested in bidding on a project like that if it becomes available. We have the technical capabilities, and the experience to handle large-scale infrastructure monitoring. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss Solentra's capabilities in more detail." Janet said, "Not for any immediate business, but just to understand what options might be available if we need them." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and considered the implications. If Jared Halden continued to mismanage the DOT relationship, Lennox Systems could lose their largest contract. And if that contract went out for rebid, Solentra would be in an excellent position to compete for it. I wasn't actively sabotaging my former company. I was simply being available to clients who were dissatisfied with their current service provider. It was a subtle but important distinction, and it kept me on the right side of both professional ethics and legal boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I had similar conversations with contacts at other agencies. The pattern was consistent. People were happy to hear from me and interested in learning about Solentra's capabilities. Many mentioned concerns about their current contractors, and several expressed specific frustrations with Lennox Systems' recent performance. It became clear that Jared Halden was struggling with more than just the DOT project. He was overpromising on timelines, under-delivering on technical specifications, and failing to maintain the kind of professional relationships that were essential in government contracting. Meanwhile, at Solentra, I was building something extraordinary. Within 6 weeks of starting my new position, I had assembled a team of 12 specialists focused specifically on government data analysis projects. We had developed proposal templates, established quality control procedures, and created presentation materials that showcased our capabilities in ways that were both technically accurate and compelling to non-technical decision makers. More importantly, we had begun to establish Solentra's reputation in the federal contracting community. Our first small project, a data analysis contract with the Environmental Protection Agency, was delivered 2 weeks ahead of schedule and exceeded all performance benchmarks. Word of that success spread quickly through the interconnected world of government procurement. By December, Solentra had secured 3 additional contracts based on referrals from satisfied clients. Our government analytics division was generating revenue faster than anyone had projected, and Leona was already talking about expanding our team and taking on larger projects. It was during this period of rapid growth that I received an unexpected phone call. My cell phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and I saw Jared Halden's name on the screen. I hadn't spoken to him since my last day at Lennox Systems, and I was curious about why he would be calling now. "Marcus," he said when I answered, and I could hear stress in his voice. "I hope you're doing well. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee sometime this week. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." I agreed to meet him Thursday afternoon at a Starbucks near Lennox Systems offices. When I arrived, I found Jared already there, looking considerably less confident than he had during our transition meetings 2 months earlier. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. "Thanks for meeting with me," he said as I sat down across from him. "I know this might be awkward, but I need to ask you about something." I waited for him to continue, keeping my expression neutral and professional. "We're having some challenges with the DOT project," he said finally. "They're saying that our recent deliverables don't meet the technical specifications, and they're threatening to invoke the performance review clause in the contract." I nodded, but didn't respond. This wasn't a surprise, given my conversation with Janet Morrison weeks earlier. "The thing is," Jared continued, "I've been going through your old project files, trying to understand how you manage these relationships, but some of the technical details are beyond my expertise. I was wondering if you might be willing to consult on this project, just to help us get back on track." It was an interesting proposition. Jared was essentially asking me to help save the contract that had been built on work I had originally done for the company that had forced me into early retirement so they could give him my job. "That's an unusual request. Jared," I said, "I'm not sure it would be appropriate, given my current position at Solentra." "I understand there might be a conflict of interest," he said quickly. "But this project is worth $200 million over 5 years. If we lose it, the company could be in serious financial trouble. And that would affect a lot of people who had nothing to do with the decision to make changes in leadership." He was right about that. Lennox Systems employed over 300 people, most of whom were good professionals who had simply been caught up in corporate politics. If the company lost the DOT contract, there would likely be significant layoffs. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I appreciate your situation, I said, but I don't think it would be appropriate for me to consult for Linux while I'm working for a competing firm. It would create too many potential conflicts. Jared's face fell. Is there anything else you might suggest? Any advice on how to approach the technical issues? I looked at this young man who had been given a position he wasn't qualified for and was now facing the consequences of that decision. Part of me felt sympathy for him. He hadn't asked to be placed in an impossible situation, but a larger part of me remembered the arrogance he had displayed during our transition meetings. His dismissive comments about my experience being outdated. My advice would be to hire experienced professionals who understand government contracting. I said, technical expertise isn't something you can learn from files or brief conversations. It comes from years of experience managing complex projects and building relationships with clients. We're trying to hire people, he said desperately, but everyone with the right experience is already employed, and the good consultants are expensive. Good expertise usually is expensive, I replied. That's why companies invest in developing it internally over time rather than trying to acquire it quickly when they're already in crisis. We talked for a few more minutes, but it was clear that there wasn't anything I could or would do to help Linux systems with their current difficulties. When I left that coffee shop, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that my predictions about Jared's inadequacy were proving correct, but sadness that a company I had helped build was struggling because of poor leadership decisions. 2 weeks later, I received another call, this time from Janet Morrison at the Department of Transportation. Marcus, she said, I wanted to give you a heads up that we're going to be issuing a formal notice of performance deficiency to Linux systems. They've missed several critical deadlines, and their recent technical submissions have been inadequate. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, though I wasn't particularly surprised. The thing is, Janet continued, we're probably going to have to terminate the contract and put the project out for rebid. When that happens, we'd like Solentra to submit a proposal. This was the moment I had been anticipating for weeks. The largest contract in Linux systems history was about to become available, and Solentra was positioned to compete for it based on our growing reputation and my existing relationships with the client. We'd definitely be interested in submitting a proposal. I said, our team has extensive experience with infrastructure monitoring projects, and we have the technical capabilities to handle a project of this scope. Good, Janet said. I'll keep you informed about the timeline for the rebid process. After we hung up, I walked down the hall to Leona's office to share the news. When I told her about the potential opportunity, her eyes lit up with excitement. That's a $200 million contract, she said. If we can land that, it would triple the size of our government division overnight. We'll need to put together a strong proposal team, I said. This will be a competitive process, and we'll be bidding against some major firms. But we have advantages they don't have, Leona pointed out. We have you, with your relationships and your understanding of what the client really needs. And we have a track record of delivering quality work on time. Over the next month, we assembled a proposal team and began developing our response to the infrastructure monitoring project. It was some of the most intensive work I had done in years, requiring technical innovation, strategic thinking, and careful attention to the specific requirements outlined in the government's request for proposals. The process reminded me why I had fallen in love with this business in the first place. We weren't just submitting a bid, we were crafting a solution to a complex national infrastructure challenge. We were proposing to build systems that would monitor the condition of bridges, highways, and other critical infrastructure across the entire United States, providing early warning of potential problems and helping prevent catastrophic failures. It was the kind of work that had meaning beyond the financial rewards, the kind of project that could genuinely improve public safety and save lives. While we were developing our proposal, the situation at Linux Systems continued to deteriorate. Through my network of contacts in the industry, I heard reports of other contract performance issues, internal management conflicts, and growing concerns among their remaining clients. The Department of Transportation formally terminated their contract in January, citing multiple performance failures and inability to meet technical specifications. Within 2 weeks, Solentra received the official request for proposals for the rebid process. But that wasn't the end of Lennox Systems' problems. In February, I learned that 2 other major clients had also terminated their contracts, citing similar performance and communication issues. The Environmental Protection Agency, which had worked with Lennox for over a decade, announced that they would not be renewing their annual data processing contract when it expired in June. By March, Lennox Systems had lost nearly 60% of their major contracts. Their stock price, which had been steadily declining since the DOT contract termination, fell by another 30% when news of the EPA decision became public. Robert Lennox called an emergency board meeting to address the company's financial crisis. According to industry sources, they were in discussions with several investment firms about emergency funding to keep the company operational while they tried to rebuild their client base. During the same period, Solentra was experiencing unprecedented growth. Our successful completion of several smaller government contracts had established our reputation as a reliable partner for federal agencies. We had hired 15 additional engineers and analysts to handle our expanding workload, and we were actively competing for contracts worth over $500 million across multiple agencies. In April, we received notification that Solentra had been selected as the primary contractor for the National Infrastructure Monitoring Project. Our proposal had scored highest in both technical merit and cost effectiveness, and our past performance record had given us a significant advantage over our competitors. The contract signing ceremony was held at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C. As I sat at the conference table, putting my signature on documents that represented the largest single contract in Solentra's history, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months earlier, I had been forced into early retirement by a board of directors who thought I was outdated and expendable. They had replaced me with someone who had no relevant experience, but who happened to be married to the right person. They had assumed that the relationships I had built and the expertise I had developed over nearly 2 decades could be easily transferred or replaced. They had been wrong about all of it. The infrastructure monitoring contract was worth $240 million over 5 years, nearly 20% more than the original Lennox Systems contract due to expanded scope and updated technical requirements. More importantly, it positioned Solentra as a major player in the federal contracting space and opened doors to additional opportunities across multiple agencies. Within 6 months of signing the contract, we had received inquiries about similar projects from the Department of Defense, the National Weather Service, and the Department of Energy, our government analytics division, which I had started with a team of 12 people, now employed over 60 professionals and was generating annual revenue of over $100 million. In August, Forbes magazine published an article about Solentra's rapid growth, titled "The Man Behind Solentra's Remarkable Turnaround." The article focused on my role in building the government analytics division and highlighted how my experience and relationships had transformed the company from a mid-tier analytics firm into a major federal contractor. Marcus Dean represents the kind of seasoned professional that growing companies need. The article quoted Leona as saying, "His combination of technical expertise and relationship management skills has been instrumental in our success in the federal contracting space." The article also mentioned Lennox Systems' recent struggles, noting that the company had lost several major contracts and was undergoing significant restructuring. Robert Lennox had announced his intention to step down as CEO, and the board was actively seeking new leadership to guide the company through its financial difficulties. Jared Halden had quietly resigned from his position as Senior Operations Director in June, citing family obligations as his reason for leaving. According to industry sources, he had returned to Los Angeles and was working for a small marketing firm specializing in social media management for local businesses. As I read the Forbes article in